Let's try this again, shall we? Greetings, banner bearers, and welcome to the dark room. I've been on a little journey with my painting over the last year, and I'd like to tell you the story. I've been commission painting on a professional basis for about a year now. After a decade of daydreaming and about 4 years hard practice, I was lucky enough to get into a studio. I've been doing jobs for them on a freelance basis for about a year, and it has been a lot of fun. There are so many great things that I enjoyed about my time commission painting. The chance to paint models that you'd never buy, the challenge of pushing your abilities, and the sense of achievement when that final brushstroke goes down are all great perks of the job. Which is why I was a little sad to step away from working on commissions last month. We have just been blessed with our 4th son, and the demands of family life have made long hours at the painting table impractical. Although I love to paint and still do so every day, I love my family more. I mean, come on, look at that little face. What a heartbreaker. In the end, the sleepless nights and the crunch of deadlines, coupled with the stress of consistently hitting the professional standard that people pay money for, was becoming unmanageable, and I made the hard decision to quit the studio. It had gotten to the point towards the end of the last job that I was dreading sitting down to paint. I suffer with ADHD, and while I don't have a very pronounced case, it can make working through long processes particularly difficult. I am what is known in the industry as a butterfly, someone that finds it difficult to focus on one part of a job. When batch painting large jobs, it is crucial to follow the process consistently. Got a lot of red to paint? Paint it all at once. Paint the most prevalent colour first. Paint anything that is recessed first, so you don't have to worry about trying to move a loaded brush past finished areas of the model later on. All these rules are great time savers, but seem to go out of the window when I sat down to paint. I would constantly have new details of a miniature jump out at me, and before long I'd be lost in the weeds, sometimes painting a single model to completion while 35 more sat in their base coats waiting impatiently. On models like the sisters that are brimming with small details, my inner butterfly was working hard to distract me with another tiny button or rivet. I had planned to make a video out of my last job, showing you the process as I brought all 37 of these sisters of battle to life. Sadly, the studio vetoed this, as they are very protective of the processes used on their models. I completely understand this. Studios must guard their work, and a magician never reveals his secrets. But it did leave me in a bit of a bind. I had 10 hours of useless footage, no incoming job, and no video. What I did have though was something that I'd been craving for the last 12 months of commission work: total artistic freedom. So, what is a freshly unshackled butterfly to do when sitting down to an empty desk for the first time in a year? I needed inspiration, and for that, I needed research. Diving into the world of high-end mini painting is an exciting and bewildering experience. As someone that used to pore over old white dwarfs in the 90s, marvelling at those classic heavy metal style minis, it's hard to fathom how far the field of mini painting has come in the last 30 years. The sheer volume of absolutely flawless work that is shared on social media sites on a daily basis is simply mind-boggling. Advanced techniques like object source lighting and non-metallic metal have pushed the skill ceiling for pro mini painters into the stratosphere, and we are blessed enough in 2024 to enjoy the work of some true masters of the craft. While looking at these pieces brings a lot of enjoyment, the sheer saturation of genius on sites like Instagram can be a little daunting for an intermediate artist looking to push themselves to the next level. I have had a few experiments with techniques like non-metallic metal, but none have really grabbed me enough to push the project across the finishing line. I was struggling to understand why, and I think I've worked it out. I, as a painter, really enjoy not knowing what the finished model is going to look like when I start painting it. Having the restrictions of executing a particular technique in a specific manner is something that kills the enjoyment of painting for me. It took me a long time to find that out. When I first started commission painting, I was surprised to find that the actual sensation of painting to a high level for a customer was a lot different to how I'd imagined it. The pressure and sense of expectation was crushing at times, especially when converting models, as one wrong cut could end up needing an expensive replacement part. It finally dawned on me during this last job that I was so focused on achieving a precise end result that I was forgetting to enjoy the process. I was falling out of love with the thing that had brought me so much joy. So I decided it was time to make a break from recipes and colour wheels, reference shots and brush exercises. I wanted to go off the beaten track. While on my travels, there was one style that did grab my attention. The kaleidoscopic colour palettes used by Craft World Studios are so unique and vibrant, they really did inspire me. Their use of bright purples and pinks, coupled with those desaturated yellows and greens, lit a spark in my imagination, and I decided to use their work as a jumping off point for my next job. After poring over their Instagram for a few days trying to work out how this incredible look was achieved, I happened across a tutorial video on Squidmar's channel, which I recommend you go and check out. In it, Marco and Alexandra reveal their unique approach to underpainting, where a lot of the tonal variety is baked into the undercoat, complementing the highlights that would be later applied. As an artist that had just spent the last 12 months in the box art mines, this was a revelation to me. While I wasn't sure I yet possessed the skill to apply this exact approach, it did get me thinking about bright undercoats and how they can be utilised to give a unique look to a paint job. There was one thing, however, that Marco mentioned that really got me thinking.
Is that I didn't put any yellow here, because if I would mix some of those yellow tones with this, the color will turn very greenish. So I want to avoid that in this underpainting, as I'm looking for specific ambience that will look kind of dark and mysterious, yet very gentle and very fitting for this.
He said that he avoided putting yellow tones over blue, as it would filter the colour towards the green part of the spectrum. This is completely understandable, but what if we were to treat this property of paint not as a bug, but as a feature? Many moons ago, I worked in the print industry. While I was only a mere sales manager, the job did allow me to become familiar with the processes involved in commercial printing and how colours are generated on a large scale. Most lithographic and digital printers will use a colour model known as CMYK, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and ketone, which in this case is black. By placing tiny dots of these colours on a white page, any tone and hue of colour can be created. Although I've seen painters apply this colour model in limited Zorn palettes, printing in this way is very different to painting. When we are painting, the colour is mixed on the palette and then applied to the model. In printing, the colour is essentially mixed on the page, with CMY modulating the tone, while the white of the paper and the black of the ketone are used to modulate the hue. This is a very technical process, and I could probably make an hour-long video talking about things like halftoning and pantones. However, for our purposes as miniature painters, we only need to worry about this one property of colour. By layering the small number of colours in the CMYK model, we can create any colour that exists. So, with all that context and theory out of the way, how would we apply this concept to miniature painting? The mini we'll be painting today is the banner bearer from the Cities of Sigmar Free Guild Steelhelm kit. This model was provided by my local Games Workshop store in Southend as part of their Mini of the Month promotion. Every month they provide a free miniature and invite painters to enter an in-store painting competition. There are no restrictions on style or approach, and the entries are judged by the store manager before being opened up to a public vote. This allows painters to get expert feedback on their entries as well as compete for the top spot of Best in Show. Fingers crossed on this one. So firstly, I'm going to prime the model with my primer of choice, Molotow Signal Black. Please see my previous video for why I think that this is the best mini primer out there. Once the model is primed, I'm going to hit the model with a thick zenithal highlight of magenta, in this case Vallejo magenta. I am then going to do an anti-zenithal highlight, a nadir highlight, a low light. I don't know what the technical term is, but I'm basically going to hit the model from the bottom, again trying to build up a very rich tone and leave as little of the black primer showing as possible. This leaves us with a very interesting look right from the outset, with the contrasting colours really picking out the features of the model and lending the piece a mystical look. I will be completely honest, this is just about where the fear started to set in for me. I mean, what did I think I was doing? Trying to emulate the style of some of the best, most original painters in the world, while also trying to put my own original spin on it? I'm not a mini painting god, I'm just a mortal with a paintbrush. I wavered for a good day and a half before taking my first step, and I decided to start with the easiest part of the piece to apply some non-metallic metal to, which was the pipe. Starting off with Vallejo Pale Blue Grey, I applied the metal colour where I thought the light would be hitting the surface, while allowing the magenta to sit in the recesses as well as a few bands across the width of the shape. When that was looking a little too shiny, I mixed up a flat grey with some of the Scale Colour Artist black and white I had on hand, and applied this underneath the shiny layer to increase the tonal variance, again taking care to avoid those recesses. After applying a small counter reflection towards the bottom of this flat layer, I was beginning to be pleased with the result. Maybe this was going to work out after all. I then applied some dryad bark to the leather parts of the model, the belt and shoes. Again, being careful not to cover the area completely, but allowing some of those bright undercoat tones to peek through at the edges. I then mixed a midtone of 50-50 dryad bark and Vallejo ivory before moving on to a sparing spot highlight in pure ivory. From there, I went on to the other metal parts of the body, namely the armour panels. I absolutely love the way Craftworld used this kind of pale, desaturated green over a deep, vibrant purple. I decided to start by applying a flat base coat to the armour panels in a Xeris purple. From there, I started to layer in some Lauren Forest in very fine hatch lines to sell the effect of scuffed and worn armour. To achieve these lines, I find it's useful to have some flow improver in my mix and to remove most of the paint from my brush after I load it. This will allow the paint to flow freely from the tip of the brush in very small quantities, with the lines remaining sharp and distinct despite being so close together. I would then add small quantities of Vallejo ivory into the mix, making sure that each progressively lighter layer was smaller than the last until I was pretty much at pure ivory. I would then make the jump to pure white for some very sparing highlights to bring out the shine on some of the upward facing surfaces of the armour. The great thing about painting a single miniature to a high standard is that it allows the butterfly in me to come out without worrying about it so much. The non-metallic parts of these pieces were grueling, but if I started to become fatigued while painting those small lines, I simply moved on to another part of the piece. I have tried to string together the process so that someone with a more focused mind than mine can follow it through logically, but if you see some parts of the video which have parts seemingly painted in one shot and unpainted in the next, that is simply my butterfly at work. I can't begin to express to you what a freeing sensation this was. No more berating myself because I was wasting time or not, quote, doing it right. Just getting lost in the immersive process of painting and enjoying the excitement of finding out how the finished piece was going to look. It was then I moved on to the cloth parts of the model, and this was going to be make or break time for all my theories. In retrospect, I maybe should have tested this out on a dummy model first, but realistically, where's the fun in that? We're on a journey of discovery here, so let's enjoy the ride and play the ball where it lays. To achieve the vibrant and varied tones of colour on the body, I used only one colour, Scale Colour Artist Primary Yellow. This is a very bright paint that thins down beautifully into a glaze. Targeting the raised areas of the model, I was pleasantly surprised to discover how the combination of these colours filter each other to create subtle transitions across broad areas of the colour wheel. The yellow glaze would filter the magenta towards orange, while the same glaze over cyan would filter towards green. If the effect of a single glaze was too subtle, I simply added another, pushing the cyan tones towards a pleasing chartreuse, while the magenta tones would brighten into a vibrant fiery yellow. It's hard to overstate how excited I was watching these first layers of paint going down and realising the potential for this technique moving forwards. I had heard of people using filtering before, mainly with the airbrush, but never applying the logic to the fundamental CMYK colours of printing in this way before. The fact is that this technique is actually pretty easy in terms of execution. If you can apply zenithal highlights and you can glaze, you can do this too, and I encourage you to try it out. Whether it's on a part of a model or a whole model, this process is genuinely fascinating to watch as you allow the physics of light to do the heavy lifting of creating those lush colour transitions. To tie the fabric together, I applied a small amount of highlighting with some ivory mixed into my primary yellow just to remove the translucency of the yellow and to give some clear definition to the raised areas. I then mixed up some quick skin tones. Recently, I have been starting my skin tones with Vallejo English Uniform, as I found the end results of using the go-to base tone of Bugman's Glow to be a little too rosy on the finished article. I do still use some Bugman's Glow, but I mixed this into the mid-tone along with some English Uniform and Ivory to achieve a more realistic feel. Of course, I'm still keeping some of those bright undercoat tones peeking through in the recesses to sell that enchanted look, and then spot highlight in Ivory to keep the skin in line with the rest of the model. I also used Vallejo English Uniform on the non-metallic gold parts of the piece. When painting non-metallic gold, I would normally start with Rhinox Hide as my base tone. However, we want our base tones to be those bright cyans and magentas, so I jumped straight to the lower mid-tone on this occasion. For the high mids, I opted for Vallejo Japanese Uniform, then mixed in the by now obligatory Ivory tone for the highlights. I made sure to push the raised highlights to the pure white using 2 thin coats of White Star to sell the contrast on the shiny gold surfaces. With the body complete, it was on to the banner. We are going to be applying the same logic of glazing through the CMYK colours here on the banner. The large surfaces and dramatic shapes of this part of the model offer the opportunity to create something truly spectacular. To begin, I decided to sell the recessed areas of the banner as a traditional parchment or canvas material, contrasting the riotous colour of the rest of the surrounding surfaces. I began with some Steel Legion Drab, applying the same small lines as I did on the armour panels for texture. I then covered this with some Ivory, ensuring some of the drab brown was showing at the edges to create a rough gradient. For reference, I should add that this is the same method I used on the parchment at the end of the banner bearer's pipe. There goes that butterfly again. Then it was on to the main event, the glazing on the banner. Again, we are going to be thinning down some Scale Colour Artist primary yellow and looking for areas of the model that are raised. At this point, I started experimenting with layering the glazes over areas where the magenta and cyan base coats meet, allowing for large variations of tone to inhabit a small area. As I applied these glazes, it started to look like the banner was shimmering in front of me, as though the light was bouncing off iridescent feathers or soapy water. In my head, I started referring to the technique as Shimmer Glazing. It's as good a name as any, so we'll go with that. The great thing about this technique is that it has the power to grab the ADHD brain inside my skull and pin it down, promising another surprise with the application of each layer of glaze. I completed this part of the paint in one sitting, which is absolutely unheard of for me. The fact I could satisfy my inner butterfly without having to change the colour on my brush became addictive, and I felt like time stopped having any meaning as these new colours and shades mixed themselves right there on the model. Before long, this part of the model was complete, and it was on to the rest of the details. I will be using the same techniques for the gold and metals on this piece of the model. However, the unicorn head on top was a new feature. I simply base coated in Vallejo Verdigris, then layered over with some pale blue grey. For a final highlight, I mixed in White Star instead of Ivory, as I wanted the tone to stay cool. I applied a small dot to the eye, followed by a cheeky pupil done with a fine liner pen. Don't worry about the glossy finish on the pen ink, as this will be dialed down during the all-over matte varnish at the end of the process. Moving on to the head, I again applied the same techniques for skin, metals and gold, trying to keep everything consistent. One difference I did make was to avoid base coating the metal on the top of the helmet in purple. As this was the bright point of the model, I really wanted this to shine, so I opted to keep the magenta in place here, only base coating the underside of the brim in purple. One part of this head that was an absolute swine to paint were the pupils underneath the brim. Normally when painting eyes, I can get one done at the normal angle, and then I turn the head upside down to do the second eye. The brim of the helmet made this pretty much impossible in this case, and I think it took me a good 3 or 4 attempts to nail something acceptable. If you do mess up when painting an eye, don't panic. Simply wait for everything to dry, then recoat in your base tone and work up again from there. We all do it from time to time. You just have to persevere with these things sometimes. With everything coming together, it was time to do the base. I'll be using a small piece of grey slate for this, with some PVA and sand to fill out the edges. Once primed, I went in with some magenta in the centre and some cyan round the edges. I then filtered some yellow over the top of the cyan, this time opting for some fluorescent yellow ink from Dala Rowney. This gave a pleasing cool green tone and reminded me that I've just started to scratch the surface with this kind of filtering technique. More experimentation is surely to follow. I gave the rock an overall brush with Steel Legion drab, then I dry brushed the whole base in ivory. A few tufts and a little moss, and I think that we are done. For the transfer, I opted for the red tree of the living city. There isn't much true red on the model, so I wanted to have a contrasting tone to really draw the eye to a central focal point. It struck me at this point that I wasn't sure what colour this banner, or indeed this whole model, was actually supposed to read as. A lot of the time when we're painting blacks or whites, we don't paint pure black or pure white, opting instead for blue greys or bone colours to help add contrast into a flat tone while still having the colour read as that tone. This was different. Not once during the process did I stop and ask, what colour should this look like? And I can't tell you what a truly liberating experience that was. With assembly complete, I gave the model a quick all-over matte varnish, and it was time for the glamour shots. Sometimes a change is indeed as good as a rest. When I made the decision to leave the commission studio I had worked for over a year, I had made all these plans about how I was going to take a break from painting, rot on my sofa for a bit, and get into some hardcore Diablo 4 gaming sessions. This competition piece was supposed to be a swan song for my time painting professionally, and I had intended to take a very long break, feed my subconscious, and come back once the muse had decided to come calling again. Well, it turns out I didn't have to wait that long. I'm already starting my next piece and theory crafting where I can take this technique next. Combining shimmer glazing with strong neons to create the rave hammer look perhaps? Watch this space. I fully expect that I'm not the first person to discover or implement this technique, and I take no claim of ownership over it. Just as the slap chop and craft world styles of mini painting find their roots in classical art techniques such as Grisel or Eboche, Shimmer glazing no doubt has a root of which I'm not aware. I'm sure any art aficionados in the comments will be generous with their advice on this point, but please don't shoot me if I've missed something blindingly obvious. As I said earlier, I'm a sleep-deprived father of 4 and may not currently be firing on all cylinders, so please be gentle. Really, the point that I wanted to drive home when making this video was that when you are painting, you must be true to yourself. In an artistic space overshadowed so heavily by the heavy metal box art style, it can be tempting to believe that there is only one way to paint a model, quote, correctly. This is compounded when commission painting by tight deadlines and light pay packets, pushing us further and further into narrow boxes designed to create maximum efficiency and removing any opportunity to stop and smell the freshly painted roses from time to time. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is only one correct way to paint a model, and that is the way you enjoy. If you love a grimy and dingy style, go wild with some streaking grime. If you love a more cartoony look, try out a black edge highlight for some cell shaded minis. If you just don't care and are happy to play with grey minis, don't ever let anyone take those 10 victory points away from you. The worst thing you can ever do as an artist is to put yourself in a box of someone else's making, no matter how nice the art on the front of that box may be. If you've liked what you've seen in this video, please do give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and maybe share it with someone you think would like to give shimmer glazing a try. It is honestly not as hard as it looks, and I'd love to see other interpretations of this approach. If you'd like to share any work, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram under Darkroom Minis. I would love to see some pictures and discuss the finer points of the technique with you. I'm going to leave you with a little story from my time as a commission painter. When I was being sent my first job, the head of the studio called me up to offer some encouragement and check that I had everything I needed to get going on the job. It was a full 2,000 point army and I had a 6-week deadline to get it done. Once we had been through the relevant checklist and he'd made sure I had all the paperwork I needed, he said something to me that really stuck with me, but for all the wrong reasons. He said, "Rob, don't fall in love with the job, just get it done." This was something that I found very difficult to grapple with, and it struck such a strange note in my brain that it took me a little while to work out why I had felt so discouraged by this. What I've come to realise is that love is an absolutely integral part of what we do as miniature painters. As a responsible parent, my free time is precious to me. It is the most expensive thing that I own. If I am not spending this time on something that brings me joy, on something that I can fall head over heels in love with and obsess over during the more mundane parts of the day, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not here to tell you to love painting. If you've sat to the end of this video, I'm sure that is already the case. I'm here to tell you to love your painting, however it comes out and however it looks. Loving what you do is so closely wrapped up in loving who you are, because our artistic expression is us expressing ourselves. So I'm asking you to release the butterfly and let it soar. You may be surprised where it lands. Thank you, banner bearers, and I'll see you next time in the dark room.